You're listening to Breaking the Silence by Reach 10, where we are creating a culture of healthy sexuality through courage, compassion, and connection to overcome the shame, silence, and fear that often surrounds topics like pornography and sexuality.
We are your hosts, Chriselle Simons and Karina Orm, and today we are breaking the silence. Welcome back, listeners. We're so excited today to be breaking the silence with Nathan and Shelby Astle. They are so incredible, and we are going to be talking specifically about pornography in a relationship, from dating to now marriage. And I love Nathan and Shelby so much. They're two of my favorite people in this world, and their story is so inspiring. And so I'm stoked to be able to talk with them and to share this with you all.
Yeah, we're so lucky to have you guys. Looking forward to a great conversation. So to get started, can you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you're up to, and what your story is?
Yeah, so my name is Shelby. I am currently a master's student at Kansas State, studying applied family science, and my research areas of interest are healthy sexual development, so like how we can help adolescents and young adults have a healthy view of themselves as a sexual being, and then also parent-child sexual communication, how parents talk to their kids about sex is a big area I'm interested in.
Hi, and I'm Nate, Nate Astle. I am also a master's student at Kansas State University in the Couples and Family Therapy program, and I have a specific research focus on financial therapy, so how couples navigate topics around money and financial conflict. So that's me.
And we're connected. We are married, so we are in a relationship with each other.
Wonderful.
Wow.
Tell us a little bit about, like, how long have you been married? How long did you date? Just a little bit more about yourselves. Yeah.
We've been married for 4 years. We met in third grade, which is like really cheesy, but we get oohs and ahs, so you know.
So cute. You should all be jealous of our story.
I am, that's for sure.
Every story is beautiful.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, we dated for 8 months before we got married, which is kind of a roller coaster, but we're really happy now, so it's great.
Yeah, we would recommend that you really get to know your partner before you marry them. We were a little lucky that we'd been kind of childhood friends, but that's our little caveat.
That's fantastic. Where are you both from?
Las Vegas, Nevada.
Cool. And so now you're in Kansas, living the dream.
Living the dream. It's great.
So great. Master's students. How long are you into, or how far are you into your master's degrees?
I will graduate in August of next year.
And I will hopefully graduate in December of next year, and then we both plan on pursuing PhDs after this. So we're forever students.
That's fantastic. So we want to know a little bit more about your story, about your relationship, and especially in regards to healthy sexuality and pornography, and how those topics have evolved throughout your relationship, and how you even first started talking about those things.
Just for a little background, I started looking at pornography when I was 13, which I think is typical age range, maybe even a little late compared to what's happening now. And I came from a highly religious and highly conservative family, but also a conservative culture. And with that came a lot of shame as far as my pornography use and what the pornography use meant about me. And so through the years, as I continued to be involved with church and talk with ecclesiastical leaders and things about my pornography use, that shame cycle really was kind of pounded into me that there's something wrong about me for ever looking at pornography is considered a sin. And so when it came to time to date and eventually look to get married and things, that was something I had a lot of fear around, was that my partner would see me as less than. And it was something that honestly was a really scary thing when we first started to talk about it.
Yeah, I guess I can share my background too. I had like a really opposite experience from Nate, and I honestly don't know how this happened, but I didn't know that like religious people looked at porn until I was like 22, which is kind of embarrassing to say, but it's true. I was just like, yeah, my religion teaches me not to look at porn and not to kill people, and we have that down. Like, no one does that. Like, we're good, check. But I started learning more from my classes at college and some professors I was working with who studied pornography. And I learned that like 60 to 80% of religious people, the stat's probably like 5 years old now, but 60 to 80% of religious people, men and women, sought out porn intentionally at least once in the past 6 months. And hearing that, I was like, oh my gosh, like, is this a real thing? Like, I had no idea, like, totally blindsided me. So where I was at when Nate and I started dating was like, I was starting to learn more about it and starting to understand that porn use was really common and really normal, which was something that had just never, ever crossed my mind before.
So how did that in your relationship as you started dating, what happened as you started figuring that out? Like, did you talk about it on the first date? Did you talk about it later on? Like tell me a little bit about that dynamic.
Yeah, so I don't think I brought it up on the first date, which is probably a smart move, but it was pretty soon after we started, making decisions to be more committed to each other. It was kind of a natural thing. But before we had even really gotten to that point, I had made a kind of a commitment to myself that I would be honest about that. If I was dating someone looking to get married, that was going to be an experience I wanted to share with my partner. Just because I know that shame, thrives in secrecy, and it thrives in when we have to feel like we are in something alone. And so for me, I really wanted to make sure that I was talking to Shelby about it so that she wasn't going to get blindsided, a month, 6 months into our marriage, and feel like she didn't know what was going on. And that took kind of a lot of guts to get to that point. But how she responded actually has really made the biggest difference for me as I've experienced shame around porn and what that's done.
Do you remember how I responded? I don't know if I remember how I responded.
Yeah, well, I just remember her saying something that's always kind of stuck with me, is that this doesn't define you. And I remember that hitting me really, really strongly because it had for so long. That's the only narrative that men and women receive when they hear that they're a pornography user, is that something's wrong with them, because typically the people that are struggling with this do have religious values that say that this is a wrong thing. And it's so easy to get from, this is a wrong thing to I'm a wrong thing, or I'm a bad person. And that what I'm experiencing right now with pornography becomes a defining characteristic of who I am. And so when Shelby talked to me that way, and it didn't happen just once, those were things that she told me frequently as I would talk with her about pornography use and the challenges I was having in that context. She would consistently remind me that wasn't part of my value. My value I'm totally whole and a complete person with or without pornography use. And that was a really impactful thing for me.
Did you know that at the time, Nathan, this idea that you are still a whole person despite you using pornography or not, when you had talked with Shelby, or was this something that you gradually learned afterwards? or before then?
I think it's been a message I'm still learning. Um, in all fairness, hearing it once, it was very impactful, but the opportunities that I've had to see Shelby prove it, I guess, to me, is that like, wow, I can trust Shelby with this kind of information because she consistently was able to respond that way. So I learned it then, and I'm still learning it now. That because those narratives, those beliefs, they're strong, especially in certain cultures and contexts. I don't know, Shelby, if you have any ideas of what that was like for you, what helped you to be able to do that?
Yeah, well, it kind of goes back to like the normalizing, and I was like watching documentaries of people sharing their stories, like religious people who didn't want to use porn, but like that it was distressing to them. I was like learning more about research, so I was like, okay, like I'm putting together like people's stories. So then when Nate came to me, I was like, it was still like scary because like coming from a background where like my whole life was like, oh, like there's a select group of people who look at porn and they are like creepy men in their basement and like the weirdos, which like is not true. That was like totally false belief on my end. But like if I had come into this conversation with Nate, like having that mentality, then I would not have reacted as like, it's okay, I'm here for you. It would have been like, like what is wrong with you? Which is just another shame message. I also want to point out that like reacting positively every time is not like the partner's job, and it's not like if the partner is feeling emotionally distressed about their partner like disclosing pornography use to them, like it's okay to have those emotions, and those emotions are real. And like I had like done a lot of cognitive work of like dealing with how I felt about it by my education before Nate told me. So like I guess it's just like it's not the partner's job to like respond perfectly every time, and it's just like an ongoing conversation.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that is a really common thing for a partner to try and manage the porn user's behavior. And that's totally normal. Sorry, I want to make sure I go back to the point of like the creepy guy in the basement. That might be the normal thing. The pornography user also internalizes that message that it's like, now I'm the creepy guy in the basement. And that's just another layer of shame that's added onto what a pornography user is experiencing. That quite honestly isn't true. Like 60 to 80% of people. So that's a lot more than just those uniquely stuck in the basement, I guess.
I really appreciate that. Shelby, I am just curious from your end, what helped you as you were you talked about like you'd worked through some of those emotions in your education, but like what has continued to help you as you moved past just dating to in your marriage? Because I think sometimes it's really difficult to separate like your emotions from his experience and vice versa. And Nathan, you probably have things to share on this too, but like what has helped you to separate that and work through your emotions?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think honestly the biggest thing was the open and honest communication that Nate and I established from the beginning, because we made it just like our relationship culture that like we knew we could sit down and have serious hard conversations about these things, because like just all the myths that like we internalize about pornography, just like not really being educated about it, like that the idea that my partner is only looking at pornography because like I'm not sexually or physically satisfying for them. That was one that I was like, oh shoot, like that was like a worry of mine at the beginning, especially since we like were abstinent until marriage. And then that again another myth of like, well, once we start being sexually active then like that'll fix everything. talking about those myths, like, and what I was feeling and believing with Nate, and then him being able to say, like, no, like, that's not why I look at porn, but also he was there to sit with me, like, I can see why that is really hard for you to, like, I can see why you're feeling that way, and, like, I know these emotions are hard for you, so let's, like, talk about them together. Yeah, that was probably the biggest thing working through my emotions, was talking with Nate about it, because you can learn a lot about pornography and, like, what other people's experiences are, but Nate's experiences with pornography are unique and different to other people's that, like, I might be reading about. So that was the biggest thing, was being open with our emotions together.
Do you have anything you want to add on that?
I guess, just while we're talking about validating, I needed to learn to validate that that my actions were at the time causing Shelby pain. And Shelby at the same time was learning to validate that I'm not just a terrible person like the narrative suggests, but that I was using pornography for something. As I've kind of learned to work through things individually, but also with a therapist, is learning that most people don't have pornography problems, they have pornography solutions, which means that a lot of the time it can be distressing for a religious couple to experience pornography, but typically the porn user is using pornography for something. And most of the time, I don't know, I want to say most of the time, for me at least, it wasn't about sex. It was about my own feelings about myself. It was about my self-worth. It was about accepting myself as a sexual being. And it was about understanding that I'm whole, regardless of whether pornography is in my life. And it's also learning things like impulse control, and it's also learning things about managing emotions. When I was feeling really upset about something, I didn't have very many tools of how do I get out of this upset emotion. And so, of course, I went to pornography. I don't like the word natural per se, but like our bodies do have sexual desires in them. And so it's going to feel good to look at pornography. But as I've learned to develop a lot of tools for coping skills, one of them being let me talk to my partner, let me learn to regulate myself emotionally and physically, like all of those different things, it becomes less about pornography and more as, can I feel good as a person, if that makes sense. I don't know, I'm sorry if I'm ranting, but
No, that makes perfect sense. I love that. That's something that I have really been exploring lately, is just like understanding what is healthy self-regulation or self-soothing, and how to help like myself have that and teach other people to have that. Because I think so often our quote unquote misbehaviors, or like even like you can use the word sin, or like negative behaviors that lead to unhealthy results, are just an unmet need that we're trying to meet in another way. And so figuring out what that need is and actually meeting it in a healthy way is so much better in the end. So I think that was perfect, Nate. I think it needs to be said over and over and over again. So so good.
Nathan, you mentioned at the beginning how you've gone through this type of shame cycle. Can you describe what shame cycle is, what that means for you, and what you do when you are in it?
Yeah. Well, I've worked hard, and I will continue working hard at getting rid of my shame cycle. So it's not a done deal yet, but especially when Shelby and I were first dating, and when this was a particular issue for us, was there's lots of things that we all feel shame about, right? For me, I might feel shame about not being successful enough. I might feel shame about not having control over myself. And so when I was feeling that way, again, I had very little coping skills. And I had a lot of narratives in my life or beliefs that were harmful for me. And so when I was feeling those ways, I would think those things. And then my threshold for pain, this emotional pain that I was feeling in shame, eventually led me, I was like, okay, well, I got to get out of this somehow. And eventually that led me to pornography use, because time and time again, that's helped. And then as soon as you have finished with the pornography, which sometimes and sometimes not is involved with masturbation, like that's when you feel, again, these narratives, as soon as that experience happens, those narratives come back in full force, like, see, told you don't have control, told you aren't good enough, told you are sinful, which again just makes you feel worse. And then you go through the same emotions, the same thought processes. And so a lot of that happens so often. It happens daily, but not just with pornography use. It's just the experience of going through shame, and it happens between intervals of when pornography happens. It happens all the time. And I do want to say, it's like, my coping skill of choice was pornography use, but there's a lot of people who experience shame and have unhealthy coping mechanisms that don't align with their values either. Sometimes it's overeating with food, and maybe, Shelby, you probably have a lot better, like,
About overeating?
no.
I was like, what a label.
Sorry, no, it's not what I meant. But I think all of us can connect with the idea that we do experience shame, and we try and get out of it at times with different things. And I think that can be a helpful way to empathize those that might be having problems with pornography because of, it doesn't align with their values. Is, let's empathize. There's a lot of us that experience shame. For me, what's been helpful is to kind of push against those narratives, those messages I get from the outside world that say that I'm not good enough, or that I'm somehow less worthy as a human being because of this. And that's really, really helped me, I guess, spin out of my shame cycle.
Thank you for describing that. I think it's really important to understand when we're in that downward spiral, that only, facilitates even further, behaviors involving pornography, or just things that we don't want to do. It just only perpetuates that, as opposed to helping us. A big question I have for you, Shelby, is, I know that a lot of women, in particular, I'm sure men as well, if they find that their partner, their female partner, is using pornography. How did you decide to marry Nathan, knowing that perhaps he wasn't perfect or had reached a certain amount of time of sobriety? What made you decide, oh, this is still a good thing, I still want to go through with this, despite all that?
I think it goes back to seeing Nate, as he described himself earlier, as like a whole, and like, I super loved him, super wanted to get married.
Oh,
that's nice. It was scary, just like at where I was at the time, because pornography had a lot of uncertainty, and I was still learning about it and learning about how it shows up in relationships. The biggest thing I think is just like, it doesn't, what Nate said earlier, like, I honestly didn't see it as something that defined him. And through our open and honest conversations, we talked about just like talked about our goals together, and religious values were a big part of that decision. And like seeing Nate, like having conversations with Nate about that were really open, where he's sharing, like crying in tears, like these feelings of shame, like that idea of like, oh, I'm marrying the creepy guy in the basement. Like, no, like that wasn't even like there for me in that moment, because I was seeing the human reaction of like who Nate really is just, he's trying to do what his goals were and what his religious values were. pornography kind of was just something that I knew that we would have to continue talking about, but it wasn't a deal breaker for me.
Right. From what I hear and understand, it sounds like you took Nathan as a whole, as someone with strengths and weaknesses. Like everybody has to take each other, right? I mean, you yourself have some weaknesses that Nathan has to deal with. I have weaknesses that my future spouse will have to deal with. It sounds like you just took that as this is a part of him in a way, but it's not, doesn't define him. It's not exactly what I need to focus on. It's kind of like that analogy of like holding up a problem next to your eye. It can block out everything, right? But if you just like put it far away and put it amongst all the other aspects of life, it's there, but it's not like a key feature.
We have another question. And the question I have is, what advice do you have for other young couples who are experiencing the impact of pornography?
Well, I'm a little biased here. See a therapist. You want to see a licensed therapist. I guarantee you it is not the first time that they've had a couple experiencing sexual problems in a variety of ways. So for me, it's been really helpful to see some professional help. And I know that isn't necessarily available for those of that might not have enough money, and I respect that. But if you can, and that's an opportunity and a privilege that you have, therapy can be a really great thing. Again, I want to acknowledge my bias. I'm a therapist in training like this, so I think everyone needs therapy. We all got problems, and that's a great thing.
I agree. Everybody can use it.
Well, I want to throw this out there too. I think it's really important to find the right therapist too, because not all therapists are created equal, and not all therapists like specialize in what you need help with. And so shopping around and like working with your budget and your insurance. Like sometimes I think we forget that therapy is covered by insurance.
It can be.
It can be, right? Yeah. So yeah, taking advantage of that. I mean, amen.
Yeah, and there's actually a lot of research that shows that the number one factor as far as what predicts client outcomes is the relationship they have with their therapist. So if I feel that my therapist gets me and that they understand me and that they care about me, those things are going to predict whether I have a successful therapy experience a lot more than some other things might suggest. So yeah, if you're not loving your therapist after 2 or 3 sessions, then you might want to talk with them about that or find a new therapist. I'm all for that.
I think another thing that I would say to couples that I've mentioned a few times already is just like really practicing open and honest communication with each other, which can honestly just start out as like, I'm feeling so anxious and nervous to have an authentic conversation with you about my feelings, but I want to try. So I'm just going to start with telling you that I'm feeling sad today and like work up from there. And then like as the partner, like making sure you're validating, which really just means like your feelings are real and they're like, they warrant attention. They're valid, basically, is what like telling your partner your feelings are valid, like practicing that with each other. I really like the speaker listener technique developed by PrEP, Scott Stanley's program, where couples like because pornography can be talking about it can be a really emotional conversation, depending on where you're coming from. And just like that, the speaker listener technique, which you can Google and find online, is where like partners take turns telling their feelings and then the other partner summarizes and then you switch, and it's a really good way to like slow down and have hard conversations. And we use it all the time, like still, when we shockingly haven't reached perfection in our marriage yet.
Barely,
yeah,
we're close.
But talking about pornography, it's a great tool to like, let's slow down and really talk about our feelings. And it takes practice, and we're not good at it. And if you respond in a really angry, upset way, which I have done, I've responded in shamey ways, like, how dare you do this? Like, I can't believe you would do that. Like, really not great ways, but we were always able to talk about it later and talk about like, okay, like, I'm sorry I responded that way, but I was feeling really like upset. So let's talk about it. So you're never going to be perfect in your communication, but like communicating about your communication and your feelings, I would say, are crucial.
I think that's crucial for marriage success, period. So
yeah, exactly. Totally.
yeah, that's so great. One time I heard you guys talk about, and I hope that you still believe this, but I love that you talk about building your relationship. And so are you willing to go there and share that with us? Like, what have you done to build your relationship outside of just focusing on pornography? Because sometimes I think, like Creed said, like problems arise in our marriages or in our relationships, and all of a sudden that's all we focus about and all we talk about, which creates more of a problem.
Yeah.
Well, I think how we build it now is probably different than when we first started. When we first started, we had a lot of time, and that's been really helpful. And then right now we're both in grad school and working our butts off. So, but for me, I guess one thing that we do is, even though we're usually working from like 8 a.m. to like 8 p.m. most days, is we go on little walks for like 2 or 3 minutes around our building. That's definitely a nice thing to like work in the same building. But little tiny drops, if you think of it like a bank account, there are going to be big deficits. Maybe they're fights, maybe they're challenges, like for like pornography, if that comes up and that's a problem. Maybe there's some other problem comes up in your life, like a medical bill. There's going to be things that really grind at your relationship gears. And if you know that there's going to be big things coming along the way, you want to do those small deposits daily, weekly, with date nights. Do those small deposits that tell your partner that you care about them. And for me right now, that's going on walks. And we don't have a lot of time, but it makes all the difference.
Yeah, and soapbox communicate about like what makes you feel connected and prioritize those things, because your relationship isn't about pornography. It's about your relationship, and pornography is just something you're navigating.
I love that. I cannot say amen enough to all of those things. I think it's so important to focus on the good and to fight the bad together, if that makes sense, whether it's like the finances or the bills, or which are the same thing. So I'm really coming up with or the kids, or the pornography, like whatever the struggle is, it's going to be there. And what are you doing to build your relationship? So important.
You're on the same team.
That's right.
Love that.
How do you guys plan on talking about sexuality and pornography with your children, and what are your opinions on that?
Shelby?
I'm just kidding.
One of my favorite topics.
Shelby, what do you say about this?
Shame has been such like a big part of Nathan's experience with pornography, and I definitely experienced shame around sexuality in general. Just a big thing is like shame-free, like open communication, like with our kids. Like it's going to be, I will bring up sexual topics. We'll learn body parts from a young age. We'll learn like consent from a young age. Having really child-centered communication or conversations where like you're letting the kid lead and ask questions and like give their input. And the biggest thing is, and when you ask teens and young adults what they want from talking with their parents, they just want you to be open and honest and be supportive and shame-free. Like that's by far the biggest thing that they say. So incorporating that into our kids, helping them feel supportive and loved, because learning about your sexuality can be really like, oh, like what's happening to my body? It can be scary. So I think just being really open. I'd be willing to share personal experiences. And yeah.
Oh yeah. I will tell my kids about my pornography use. I think one, it will probably normalize if/when they see pornography, and if it becomes something that they don't understand what's going on. And two is, I don't know, when you're human, and when your kids see you as like, yeah, you're the coolest mom and dad ever, which clearly we're going to be, is they should know that, yeah, we also have things that we've had to address in our life, and that's okay. And yeah, our kids, I don't know, this is just personal philosophy, but it's like our kids should know who you are.
Yeah,
I really love that.
I completely agree. I think all of us grew up believing our parents are perfect and amazing, wonderful. It's so helpful if we can understand their humanity and know what they struggle with, just so that when we fall into our own struggles, that we know that, oh, I can still overcome this or still be a good person, where this is normal. Because yeah, when I fell into my pornography, I mean, I didn't know that anybody else did it either. And so I felt like I was the only one. So if your parents are open to you to talk about just, weaknesses in general, then it can open conversations for, oh yeah, I messed up in this way, or this is what I'm struggling with, but this is how I continue to work at it or overcome it. That is very empowering, and I feel like hopeful for lots of people, and allows for, or facilitates an atmosphere of that is hopeful and not depressing for people who struggle with something. And I love honest, open communication in family from the get-go. I hope.
Yes, love it.
So good. So good. So what are your thoughts about what healthy sexuality is? Like, what does that look like in your lives? What do you like? Yeah, tell us.
So actually my favorite definition is from the World Health Organization. I pull it up, so I'll read it to you. They say sexual health is a state of physical, mental, and social well-being in relation to sexuality. It requires a positive and respectful approach to sexuality and sexual relationships, as well as the possibility of having pleasurable and safe sexual experiences free of coercion, discrimination, and violence. So like the behaviors that each person is like sexual behaviors that they're going to choose to do looks different based on their value system, based on their goals in life. But in my opinion, healthy sexuality is feeling like positive about myself as a sexual being, whether I'm choosing to be abstinent, whether I'm sexually active. If I like really like sex positive and shame free, like I feel like shame is just like a continual theme, but like if you're feeling a lot of shame about sexuality, then it's going to hinder your ability to like have like really enjoyable sexual experiences, or just have like a positive view of yourself as a sexual being. Yeah, that's how I would define it.
Yeah, great answer.
Work.
Takes work.
This is awesome. Ditto. Same. Oh, that's perfect. Has anything good come from this challenge that you've faced together?
I mean, I sometimes struggle with the word like challenge, because I think it's something like always like a bad thing, but like it's for Shelby and I, like we have learned to talk to each other. And I think we honestly would have done that anyways, whether pornography was there or not. But this just happened to be our pathway to good communication, one pathway. And I don't know, that for me, kind of finishing where we started, like I had so many questions about who I was and whether I was a good person and whether I could feel good about myself. And as Shelby and I have developed, not just in the skill of communication, but the emotional experience of good communication, those feelings have really flourished into a confident, happy, solid sense of self. So I think for me, learning to connect on that deep of a level with my spouse, but also just with learning to connect that way with anyone has been life-changing. And I know like connection is the real anti-porn. I know that's the motto that you guys go by, and I connection is hugely impactful.
I agree. I also think for me, I had to unlearn some of the things I was socialized to learn. As a religious woman, I was socialized to always be taking care of other people and kind of taking other people's emotional burdens onto myself. So when we were first married, it was okay, what's our game plan? How are we going to make sure that porn doesn't happen this week? And I'm going to text you, I'm going to pick you up at this time, or things like that. And that did not work for us at all. That was horrible. First of all, it's never anyone's job to be responsible for other people's actions.
Preach.
But in our marriage, that was really detrimental, because I was taking on emotional labor that wasn't my emotional labor to have in the first place. So as we've talked about it and worked through how that impacts us, I've learned that no, I'm never responsible for any of Nate's decisions, and I'm just responsible for I see my role as I'm just here to be supportive and love you, but it's not my job to monitor you, or I'm not responsible for anything you do. So that was a big learning thing that I think came out of this.
That's
Wonderful.
fantastic.
Wonderful. I think it's so important to understand those emotional boundaries, but also how far you can extend to support someone. You can't take on their problems and try to fix them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As we wrap up, is there anything else that you want to share with our community, as we are seeking to change the culture and to really create healthy sexuality and overcome the shame, the fear, and the silence? Anything else that you want to add to that message?
I just want to support y'all's motto or game plan, whatever it's called, breaking the silence. I've heard so many people talk about their porn use as I thought I was the only one who was doing it, and that's so far beyond true that it's sad that we have so many people from our age group that felt like they were alone when really there were so many. So I think just learning from other people's stories is really important. You never have to share your story if you don't want to, but if you want to, people will rally around you, and people have had your same experiences, most likely. So break the silence. Yeah,
Love.
I did a fist pump when I said that, but I realized that listeners can't see me.
Can't see that.
I guess for me, it's just there's hope, and there's hope all along the way. You don't have to wait until pornography is no longer a thing in your life to be hopeful about your present and current situation. For some people, that might look like finding a therapist. For others, it might not. They might need a sense of community. Others might need another thing. I want to respect that everyone has kind of their own individual experience when it comes to something like this. And for those that might be dating a partner or opening their eyes to working with people that have experienced pornography in some form, maybe it is a boundary and it is going to be a deal breaker for you. And that's only you can decide what your boundaries are. And so I want to honor and acknowledge everyone's autonomy. And while you're doing that, if you found someone or you're thinking about someone that you're like, yeah, everything else is perfect except for this, I'd encourage you to look at them the way that Shelby's looked at me, that it doesn't define them. And I would encourage you to not let it define them for you. Because we are all people and we all do have ups and downs with a lot of different things. And only you can decide what you're going to accept and what you're not. But just be as kind to the idea of people as you can be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much, both of you, for taking time out of your busy grad school schedules to chat with us and to share your stories and your wisdom and your just who you are with us. I'm very grateful.
Yeah. So happy to have you guys. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, expertise, or at least all the learning that you're doing, and just your experience. It's so helpful for couples and young adults out there. So thank you for sharing and helping us break the silence.
Totally.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for listening to Breaking the Silence by Reach 10. Help us create a new culture of connection by sharing what you heard today with 10 people. Please help us reach more young adults by going to iTunes to rate and review our podcast. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. Learn more on our website at reach10.org or follow our social media. We want our listeners to know that we share these views to open the dialogue on these tough issues. We are not professionals, and ideas shared on this podcast should not be taken as professional advice. The opinions and views that our hosts and guests share do not necessarily reflect the views of Reach 10, and we don't guarantee the accuracy of any statements you hear. Reach 10 is not responsible for your use of information heard in this podcast. We keep learning and invite you to join us as we build a more open, compassionate, and courageous culture.